Welcome back to Understanding the Psyche. Last time we talked about identity and life purposes. Today, I want to focus on something that is along the line of that is just as important as our life purpose and our identity, which is talking about motivation and culture. There's two type of cultures that people adhere to. One is individualistic culture and the other one is a collectivist culture. Individualist culture is more dominant in Western culture or is aligned with Western cultural thinking. When we talk about individualist culture, we're talking about more of a focus on the self as opposed to the focus on the collective as in terms of collectivist culture. So I want to kind of talk about why the the benefit and the downfall or the good or bad of an individualist culture. The good aspect of an individualist culture in terms of when we think about the focusing on promoting the individual as opposed to the collective whole is it leads to individual being able to think more for themselves. They are more creative in such a way because they're allow more wiggle room to focus on their uniqueness, focus on their strength, and because that's what's celebrated in individualist culture as opposed to collective culture. People are taught from a young age that they need a instead of trying to fit in, it's better to, you know, stand out from the crowd because that's what's celebrated. That's what people want to see more of in an individual. Also, that comes along the line of being successful. Success is defined on an individualistic level as opposed to in a collectivist society where it is defined on the collectivist or in a group setting. But when you look at that, there's also a downside to when you're putting success at an individual level because you're so focused on an individual being successful and standing out from the crowd. The pressure is that, oh, the individual has to do things that they're different. And also because the individual has to focus on being able to succeed individually, it's hard for them to ask for help when they need help, as in opposed to a collectivist society where the success is more focused on the collective whole as opposed to an individual. So people will work together to work towards a common goal or work towards helping, for example, family members, friends, people that they admire to reach success as opposed to the individualistic culture where success is defined so much as an individual level that the expectation for success is so high in an individualist society where you have to succeed as an individual. It's it 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 becomes the defining point in whether or not a person is truly successful is if they're able to obtain higher status in a company, higher status in society, make more money, have more power. That's not to say that collectivist society does not celebrate that or does not focus on that. But at the end of the day, in a collectivist society, it's more about sacrifices that an individual has to make to be able to help the collective whole, for example, his family, um, the uh the society that he or she grows up in, um h- to help to contribute to for others so that others can benefit also from their success, but also to help others also achieve their success along the way. That together they grow as a community. But when you think about that, as much as there's, when you look at the individualistic culture where you're talking about, the focus is on the individual succeeding so much that if the individual doesn't succeed, it puts a lot of pressure on the individual because they need to succeed to stand out. But when you look at a collectivist culture, because the success is so integrated into the family as a whole, that means the individual has to sacrifice certain things to be able to succeed for the family, and that means the expectation of the family becomes their expectation. What do I mean by that? Look, for example, at Asian culture. A lot of times, children growing up in Asian culture, or people in general growing up in Asian culture, they don't really have a choice or the freedom to choose what they want to do with their life. A lot of times, from a young age, their family, especially their parents, are the ones that determine what they should be doing with their life career wise. There's a stereotype out there that because a lot of Asian folks are focusing on, their children being either doctors or anything scientific related careers, that when you think about when you see an Asian person, oh, the expectation or the thought process is, oh, they're going to major in something scientifically related. But we don't really think about is whether or not the individual has the abilities, or whether or not they like that field of studies. Everyone has their likes and dislikes. But when you not quantify, but when you put the expectation like, oh, you have to do, or you have to follow this certain career path or this path in life, you're taking away their personal freedom. You're putting more pressure on them and not allowing them to go through the process of discovering who they are and how they fit in this world and how they can contribute to not only their family but to society as a whole. And as human being, if you reflect on what I said in the previous episode, is we all have a purpose in life, and we need to find that purpose, and that purpose usually aligns with serving others. We aren't meant to serve ourselves or to serve just a select few people in our lives. We are meant to serve people who we meet and interact with along the way. And when we're not able to do that, or when we shy away from that because we don't want to do that, we find ourselves in a predicament that, until we realize what that predicament is, it's hard for us to really reach success academically, professionally, and even personally. We need to learn to define success on different levels and see how these success and achievement align with one another. It is, when you look at it, the definition of each of these success is different. But you have to realize in life, we play different roles. And the only way we can achieve success is when all these roles that we play align with one another. If not, you can't really achieve success no matter how how much you try to in your mind rationalize it, because it won't work that way. Our social roles in life will only work is when they're in congruence with one another. When we are ourselves throughout all the roles we play in life. The only difference is we adapt to different situations and to different people that we interact with to ensure that we show them respect, that we show them that we care for them. When you put on a facade of how you interact with others because of how culture defines how you should act, it puts a lot of pressure on yourself. I'm not saying that we shouldn't follow social norms that our culture teaches us, because social norms are guidelines to help us behave in the right way, to behave in ways that are acceptable socially. But there are also people out there who try to rebel against social norms, the status quo. They try to stand out to be different. But what they don't understand is being different doesn't mean you go against the status quo. Being different doesn't mean you go against the culture that you were born in. Now, I want to go back to talking about individualistic and collectivist culture. In the United States, we're a melting pot. We have people that comes from country that practices collectivist culture, and the United States is more Western culture. Western culture are typically practices individualistic culture as opposed to Eastern culture that practices collectivist culture. We have to come to an understanding, especially for people like me who comes from parents who live in collectivist culture society, that we it is we need to practice collectivist culture with individualist culture. Why is that important? Because it comes back to the part where, yes, we need to learn to, promote uniqueness, promote, characteristic of an individual that makes him or her different from others. But but also there are times in our lives where we need to focus on ourselves and improve ourselves so that we can be beneficial and helpful to the collective whole. But we cannot forget where we come from. We cannot forget who we are, because deep down we are who we are based on the culture that we are raised in. For example, the one thing growing up that my mother always taught me that really resonates with me is that no matter what you do, you cannot escape the culture or the culture you were born into or the people that you belong to. Yes, you can choose later on in life to follow certain culture, to follow certain way of living. But when people look at you, the one thing you can't change is your skin tone, the way you look. If you look at everyone, we're all different from one another's. Yes, we are categorized based on our ethnicity, the religion that we practice, the culture that we practice. But deep down at the core, we're unique in how we interpret this world, how we look at certain things. And that's where I want to focus this cultural talk about, in terms of our identity, to be able to have an identity that we can be proud of. And when you look at it from a cultural perspective, it is very important that we learn to ap- appreciate and value the individual, but we cannot neglect the fact that we are still part of the collective whole, of the community that, of we were born into, whether it's Western culture or Eastern culture. That's the and that brings me to another point that I want to make is the pitfalls of these two culture. When you follow the Western culture or what I call individualist culture so much, because of the promotion of, of the individual so much, the expectation is for individuals to do things by themselves without relying on other people to help him or her to succeed, because success is defined in terms of the individual being able to do things on his or her own. When you look at it from that perspective, you're placing a lot of stress and a lot of expectation to succeed on the individual. And granted, as human beings, we have flaws, we have weaknesses. We we cannot achieve everything by ourselves. There are times we are going to need help from others. But because of the thought process that oh, I have to succeed on my own. I have to get to that peak of success. I have to climb that mountain of success by myself, and I can't really ask for help because asking for help is viewed as a weakness. That creates a lot like I said, that creates a lot of pressure for the individual. And that creates not only pressure, but from pressure comes anxiety, comes depression. When a person can't live up to the expectation that is placed on them, it it causes them to lose motivation in themselves, lose faith in themselves. And when that happens, they, instead of going after success, they start getting to the mindset, oh, I can't do that. I can't succeed. I'm not, and they start comparing themselves to other people. When we do that, we open the door up for depression, because we start seeing like, oh, I'm not as good as that person. I'll never be able to achieve that what that person is achieving. But we forget this. We forget that we are unique. That we we can only compare ourselves to ourselves. We can only What I mean by that is we want to be the best version of ourselves. We want to be better than who we are yesterday. We don't It's not about being better than our friends, than our cousins, than our brothers or sisters, or than our parents, but to be the best version of ourselves. When we when when we can't do that, we're never gonna feel that we're proud of ourselves. We're never gonna feel that we have really achieved success. Because success in Western society, or success is almost always measures intangible objects. For example, how much money you have, how much items you have, the car you drive, the clothing you wear, the house you live in. That makes it hard for people to focus on personal achievement, the mo- to focus on success internally as opposed to externally. And that brings me to what motivates us to succeed, and how did that impact by culture as a whole. in an individualistic culture, our motivating factor are more extra sync motivation. What does extra sync motivation mean? We're motivated from by outside factors to succeed. So you see, when you look at history, the timeline of history, ever since the Industrial Revolution, and even more so when just after the World Wars, where people started having more money and stuff, is that the United States or any countries that adheres to Western culture, which the United States adheres to, everything was about having more material, having more items in the house. And the more items you have, the more products you have, it makes you feel that, oh, you're better than other. It shows your status in society, where your social classes are. So nowadays, everything is about having the latest model of phones, having the best models of cars out there, having the best models of TVs, etc., etc. When you're just chasing after spending money to be better than other people, at the end of the day, my question to you is, does having all these items really make you feel fulfilled? Or is just creating an emptiness inside of you that you're chasing buying more products? That at the end of the day, you have all these items at home, but you really don't utilize it all. Take, for example, the iPhone or smartphones in general. Smartphones compared to the past, which is the typical phone, has a lot of apps on it. My question, and a lot of functions on it. For example, when you look at the camera on the phone nowadays, it can shoot very high quality photos, take high quality um video. But do we utilize it all? Do we need all of that? Do we really need a phone with like 12 megapixels or higher when we're just, taking photos for so that we can remember the event we went to or hanging out with families or friends? The answer, if you really think about it, is no. But yet, because we want to be better than other people, that pride in us causes us to spend more money. When you look at the iPhone, originally the iPhone only cost around like what, $700, $800. Nowadays, you're talking about spending thousands of dollars on an iPhone, and it's just gonna keep going up with all these, add-ons and everything on there. And if you really compare technology on how, it advances, for example, for the iPhone from one model to the next, there's not that much of an increase in technology on it. But yet, people will buy the latest model because for them it shows status. And that is the problem we have, especially within individualistic culture. It's about, showing off. It's about being better than others because that makes us feel better about ourselves. When you look at when you look over at collectivistic culture, the motivation for individuals from this culture is more interesting. It's it's more focuses on the individual as opposed at the individual and the family as opposed to the individual and trying to, be better. For collectivist culture, it's not about having more items in the house. It's about self-sacrifice. It's asking the question of, what can I do to help my family? What can I do to, so that that I, my family can have the things that they have, that they need, or just to make my family feel happier because I can afford to get these for them at my own expense. So conformity, it comes down now. We want to talk about conformity. Okay, so in in an individualistic culture, conformity isn't that strong when it comes to group. You don't have to really conform to group. But in a collectivist culture, it is expected you conform to the opinion, to the decision of the group as a whole. To go against it causes the people to, look down on you, not look down, but question like, why are you going against the majority? It and that's also a downside to a collectivist culture because it gets us into groupthink. Now that I kind of, talk about the difference between the two, I I want to talk next in terms of why we need to practice both culture and not just focusing on being either individualistic or collectivist. So the the one thing we need to learn from individualistic culture is being able to think for ourselves. But we cannot forget to include others in our thought process because at the end of the day, we were born to serve others. We weren't born just to serve ourselves. So when we only focus on ourselves, we're going to always have that emptiness inside of us. But we cannot go with the majority or conform to the group as a whole if the group as a whole is making the wrong decision. We need to be able to stand up and go against the group and help our, our society, our group of people be better, to promote what is right, what is healthy, instead of promoting things that are unhealthy, unwanted behavior that when viewed by others culture, that they will, there's a stigma that's around it. We don't want that. So another thing about the social norm of collectivist and individualistic culture is, in an individualist culture, decision making is based on, a lot of time based on guilt. It's because we're viewed, or not viewed, but we are, how should I call it, evaluated based on individual success or what we do as an individual in our lives, how we live our lives. That's what I should say. There's a lot of guilt that could be involved. So if we, for example, if we fail or we can't succeed or we do things that, people will punish us either verbally or non-verbally, it brings a lot of guilt to us because we failed ourselves. But that is in and of itself, if we as an individual understand that, failure is okay as long as the failure that we encounter in our lives are smart failures. Because growing up, when you look at it, especially with how advances in technology, advances in how information are being um, transmitted or relayed to everyone, there are certain things you should know as an individual that you shouldn't be doing and that you should avoid because you know the repercussion that is going to accompany that. And in that way, you can avoid feeling guilty. You can avoid, the sense of guilt that or the pressure people are going to put on you as an individual because you should have known better. As opposed to a collectivist culture where when you fail, the failure is more geared towards the family because you're worried about bringing shame to the family. Because for the family, it's all about saving face. You don't represent you as an individual. When you interact with the world as a whole, you're representing your family. And you want to ensure that you portray the best representation of your family through you as much as possible because that brings honor to your family. So, the last thing that I want to focus on focus on now is the way that we think in terms of analytical and holistic thinking. Individualistic society, because it promotes individual or focus on the individual solving problem by themselves, it helps individual have an analytical thinking process, meaning people can analyze and separate the parts within the problem or see the problem for, okay, why is it occurring? And that type of thinking also impacts our decision making as opposed to a collectivist society where the thought process is more holistic. It's we see information as how it connects, how it relates to one another. And based on that, we make our decision based on how all these information interact with one another. Now that, I have talked to you about the difference between an individualistic culture and a collectivist culture and why it's going to be more beneficial to have the thought process or to be influenced by both of them and practice both in individualistic and collectivist culture. I want to see what your thoughts are on what I have to say today and how is it going to impact you in the future. And if you like my video today, please hit that like button, share, and subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment down below on what else you want to hear me, my thought on, or what else do you want me to talk about in the future. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see you in the next video.